What is up, guys? Welcome back to another UFC prediction video. This weekend, we have UFC Fight Night Adesanya versus Pyfer. Last week, we did pretty good on predictions. We went 9-3 on UFC London. Movsar Evloev got a controversial decision. I think he did enough to at least scrape by a draw, but it looks like Evloev is going to be next for Volkanovski. But without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this weekend's full card predictions. First fight on the card. We're going to be going over Ricky Simón versus Adrian Yanez. Look, I think Tybura is going to win. I don't have a read on this fight. I have no idea who either of those guys are. So we're going to start out with Ricky Simón versus Adrian Yanez. Now, I like this fight in the bantamweight division. Both of these guys are kind of prospects that had a lot of hype when they first came around, but they've been pretty inconsistent as their careers have progressed. Adrian Yanez definitely stands out with the boxing. Hand speed is absolutely outrageous. He has really good combination work, really good counters, but it's really the defense that has kind of been his downfall throughout his career. You remember him getting knocked out versus Rob Font, got TKO'd with leg kicks versus Jonathan Martinez, and last time out lost a split decision, which was a very, very close fight and a good performance from Yanez against Daniel Marcos, where he got taken down a little bit, but he looked sharp, especially on the feet with his offense. Ricky Simón, he's kind of gotten knocked out every time he has a big opportunity. You know, you think about him versus Song Yudong in that 5-rounder. Was on his way to losing a decision, but got caught with the left hook in the 5th round. Got knocked out by Uriah Faber when he was on the come-up, which really isn't a good look. But he's been doing good recently, even though he's coming off of a loss. That was a very, very close fight with Raoni Barcelos, who, even in his old age, has proven to be one of the best fighters in the bantamweight division, deserving of a ranking for sure. Beat Peyton Talbot, Cody Garbrandt, and Ricky Simón all on the bounce. So that's very impressive for Raoni Barcelos. And I think he has a win against Christian Quinones before those three anyway. So no shame in the loss to Raoni Barcelos. And he looked definitely improved in his last 2 wins before that. Easily got 15 minutes of control time versus Cameron Smotherman. Not a high level of a win, but a dominant performance nonetheless. And I think that Ricky Simón in this fight, Adrian Yanez, he's a guy that gets hit with right hands pretty often. You know, Rob Font knocked him out with it. He got hurt badly in the 1st round versus Daniel Marcos with it. He does get touched up with the right hand quite often. Ricky Simón has a good 2 on him. You know, knocked out Bashrat with it. And that's a solid win for Ricky Simón. A good knockout. And that was the last time he fought in Seattle. I think the hometown crowd helps Ricky Simón a little bit, and I think it's going to be a deciding factor here in this fight because I think this fight's going to play out very closely, and I think Ricky Simón's going to win a split decision. I think that he has better cardio than Adrian Yanez. Yanez still has pop and speed throughout the fight, but he starts to make bad decisions. He starts to get lazy with his defense, like shooting takedowns when Daniel Marcos is completely gassed in the 3rd round. Ricky Simón doesn't have the highest fight IQ, but he doesn't tend to make really bad mistakes like that. This could look a lot like Vinicius Oliveira versus Ricky Simón, but I don't think Yanez is as good of a grappler as Oliveira. Even though Oliveira, his grappling got exposed last fight versus Bautista, that's levels and levels above where we're talking about right now. I think that Ricky Simón, he's going to be able to apply forward pressure against Adrian Yanez. Like I said, Yanez has great boxing offense, but it's the head movement, the footwork that tends to let him down at times. I think Ricky Simón can incorporate more weapons. I think he can dig some low kicks against Yanez, and ultimately I think he can get some takedowns where if he can establish any control time whatsoever, get off some ground and pound, where I do think he can. You know, he was taking down Barcelos. I think he can take down Yanez, where Yanez was getting taken down by Daniel Marcos. Marcos is a decent grappler, but I think Simón probably has at least better takedowns. Even though Marcos subbed Miles Johns in his last fight, he's been improving heavily in the grappling. He doesn't have the cardio that Ricky Simón has. I think Simón's pressure, the wrestling, leg kicks, just varying the martial arts a little bit will help him win this fight via decision. Adrian Yanez is always live for a KO, but I just don't see him knocking out Ricky Simón in this spot, and I think Ricky Simón wins on the card. So yeah, give me Ricky Simón 29-28 decision. Next fight on the card, Bruno Lopes versus Navajo Stirling. Navajo Stirling came onto the scene with a good amount of hype off the Contender Series where he beat a low level of competition, but it was a brilliant finish. And I don't think he's gotten a finish since then. I know he went to a decision with Tuco Tokos, went to a decision with Urslan and Bellato. So all similar stylistic fighters, kind of heavy pressure fighters with decent grappling, okay boxing. And I think it's a good stylistic, comparison to Bruno Lopes, who brings a lot of the same things to the table as his previous three opponents. Physical, will push you up against the fence, decent striking, especially, in terms of power in the hands. Lopes got knocked out badly by Dustin Jacoby last time out. The striking differential was truly on display in that fight, but in his prior fight where he did win, he could replicate some type of success that he had against Magomed Gadzhiesulev, where Gadzhiesulev is a, bouncy, accurate kickboxer, similar to Navajo Stirling, but I think Stirling is much more physical. He's much better in terms of the wall grappling. He took down Bellato pretty consistently in his last fight. And overall, I think that Navajo Stirling is just going to be the much better striker. I think he can just stay on the outside, leg kick, jab at range. He's going to be faster, more athletic than Bruno Lopes. Bruno Lopes really doesn't hit that hard. He has decent pressure, but I think Stirling, he's going to be more accurate. He's going to hit the target more often. And where Lopes was just kind of able to hold Gadzhiesulev against the fence, I think Stirling displayed in his last fight that he's made improvements in that realm for that not to happen. Give me Navajo Stirling to win this one via decision. Next fight on the card, we have Marcin Tybura versus Tyrell Fortune. Look, I don't know who Tyrell Fortune is. They're bringing him in to fight Marcin Tybura here. I think he was a PFL guy or an LFA guy, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm going to be honest, I didn't do my tape study on this fight. But Marcin Tybura looked horrible last time out against Ante Delia, where Ante Delia does push quite a heavy boxing pace, especially early. He doesn't hit that hard, but he can overwhelm you, fluster you, if you will. And that's kind of what happened to Tybura. But Tybura looked stuck in the mud, half asleep on that Paris card where he fought Delia. But normally, he's pretty crafty. Beat Tuivasa, beat Denise. I'm expecting Tyrell Fortune to be kind of a similar type of fighter to that. He may have good grappling, which is where Tybura tends to have a lot of success. Was able to take down McParkin at times, land good leg kicks. Tybura's crafty, great ground and pound, crafty takedowns, good leg kicks. Not the most athletic fighter, especially in his old age, but I'll pick him to win here based on experience. But like I said, I didn't do tape study on this fight. Tyrell Fortune might be the next Ngannou for all I know. So yeah, but give me Tybura. I'll pick him by ground and pound TKO in round 2. Next fight on the card, Chase Hooper versus Lance Gibson Jr. Now, Lance Gibson Jr., Bellator guy / PFL guy, fought Bobby Green on short notice, and he lost that fight pretty convincingly. Bobby Green styled on him for the most part, and he got tired in that fight. I think he's mainly a grappler, but just kind of an overall MMA generalist. Chase Hooper, on the other hand, is an absolute specialist. Was riding a good amount of momentum going into his last fight where he did get knocked out by Alexander Hernandez, but, it was a flash knockdown, really quick finish, didn't take a lot of damage, and he was doing decent at range before the TKO. And Alexander Hernandez just kind of got him out of nowhere, really. But before that, he was beating Unks, Jim Miller, Clay Guida, Borshev, and the win over Jordan Levitt really aged well a couple weekends ago, where Jordan Levitt got another win in the featherweight division. But Chase Hooper, like I said, he's a specialist on the feet. His range does help him get away with not being very good on the feet, not very fast or coordinated on the feet. Kind of has that baby giraffe syndrome, if you will. Doesn't hit hard whatsoever. But like I said, he does do good with his range. He can put points on the board and burn minutes off the clock to where eventually he can shoot his head outside single. And his jiu-jitsu is just absolutely phenomenal. His guard passing ability, positional awareness, control, submission game, transition, back taking, everything about Chase Hooper's jiu-jitsu is absolutely world-class. He's one of the best jiu-jitsu grapplers in the lightweight division and one of the best submission artists in the division as well. And I think he's going to get a submission here over Lance Gibson Jr. I think they'll be kind of boring for 1 or 2 rounds. Eventually, they'll get to the ground. Chase Hooper is going to be the one that gets the better of the scrambles. He's got a huge height and reach advantage here. I think even if he ends up on bottom, he can attack from guard look for triangles, arm bars, sweeps. Give me Chase Hooper to win this fight via submission in the second round. I think he can make it look like the Borashev fight. And he knocked down Borashev with a nice overhand left. Chase Hooper's quite, a developed fighter at this point in his career. He should win this fight. Like I said, second round sub. Next fight on the card, Tufik Musayev versus Ignacio Bahamondes. Bahamondes lost last time out versus Rafael Fiziev, and he looked super, super tentative. Before that was on a pretty good roll. Like I said, before the Fiziev loss, beat Turner, beat Torres, Christos Giagos. He lost to Ludovic Klein, but that's a high-level loss. And I like the striking of Ignacio Bahamondes. We remember the nasty spinning heel kick that he got against Roosevelt Roberts. Head kicked Giagos. His kicking arsenal is very, very good. Like I said, sometimes he's too tentative. At times, he has great counter striking like we saw versus Manuel Torres, which is crazy that he got that win. And he just looked like he was seeing ghosts versus Fiziev. But most of the time, the range striking is good. Front kicks up the middle are good. He's got great kickboxing overall. And he did get taken down and controlled by Turner early in that fight, which is kind of a concern, but ended up getting the submission there. But here against Tufik Musayev, Musayev can wrestle a little bit, but I don't think he's really going to have a lot of success with it here. He may, but I think Bahamondes is developed enough in that part of his game at this point to deter it. I think for the most part, this fight is going to take place on the feet, and Musayev is literally just a one-shot merchant. Like, he just tries to throw right hands over and over again. No setups, no jab, no leg kicks, no front kicks, no body kicks, just no setups or feints. He really just doesn't have a stand-up game that's put together whatsoever. He just kind of slings right hands. So yeah, I think Bahamondes is going to piece him up and eventually find a knockout with a head kick in the third round. So yeah, give me Bahamondes third round TKO via head kick. And Musayev, he only had one fight in the UFC. Orobai subbed him up early. I just don't think he's going to have much for Bahamondes here. Next fight on the card, Kyle Nelson versus Terrence McKinney. This should be a pretty close fight. Terrence McKinney had a fucking one-round war from hell against Chris Duncan in his last fight. And that was very entertaining, but he eventually did get finished up in the clinch. Had a good win versus Borashev with the arm-in guillotine. The one-arm guillotine, I believe it was, versus Borashev in the fight before that. McKinney, very, very athletic fighter, super fast twitch, explosive, fastest knockout in lightweight history. He's got a good straight left, like he knocked out Frivola with. And his submission and grappling game's definitely what you want to write home about. He subbed Faraz Ziam, which might be his best win, in his career. Did get subbed up by Sadikov and knocked out by Bonfim. He does get highlighted when he does lose. Got flying knee versus Sean Woodson, got head kicked versus Ribovich, got flying knee versus Bonfim. He's not the most durable fighter. He's definitely like a glass cannon. Really just kind of all over the place. Kyle Nelson, basically the exact opposite. Very conservative fighter, kind of basic stand-up on the feet is really what you're going to get from him. He's okay at defending takedowns, but the kickboxing, the Muay Thai is definitely his strong suit. Had a good performance last time out versus Matt Frivola and got a good, I believe it was a decision there, but he really should have got a TKO win. Frivola was flopping on the deck like a fish. And great TKO win versus Bill Algeo as well. That's a solid win. At the time, Bill Algeo is no longer in the UFC, but losing to Steve Garcia by TKO, there's no shame in that. Garcia is probably going to knock out Lopes. I'm going to take Nelson would be a sneaky pick here, but I got to go McKinney. I think he trains at a good gym. I know he works very, very hard in between fights. Seems to be a disciplined professional. If only his discipline would translate into his fights and he could just use his athleticism and his skills a little more conservatively, it might work better for him. But sometimes the crash out style works for him. And I think that the speed in the submission game is going to help him here. I think he can maybe make this look like the Borashev fight where he just kind of overwhelms him early. Maybe gets tagged with a couple of shots, but as long as he doesn't let Kyle Nelson have a clean kickboxing fight, put it against the fence, string together really long combinations, shoot takedowns on the end of it, get the fight to the mat, he should be able to find a sub. So I'll actually take Terrence McKinney via first round submission. Next fight on the card, good matchup here. Mansur Abdul Malik versus Yusri Belgaroui. Yusri Belgaroui did not impress me on the Contender Series. He had 2 fights on the Contender Series. Lost to Marco Tulio, which was, I believe, 2-3 years ago almost at this point, where he got completely dominated and showed nothing in that fight. And then he fought some Asian guy on the Contender Series where he dominated for 3 rounds, eventually got a knee TKO in the 3rd, but was less than impressive. And on the regional scene, never really fought a high level of competition. Of course, he was a former Glory kickboxer, beat Alex Pereira by decision, got knocked out twice after that. Had a, solid Glory kickboxing career. Very, very put together striker, very clean technique, and his range is going to be a huge issue here. For Mansur Abdul Malik, Mansur Abdul Malik is definitely like a brute, comes forward with big power. He has explosive, blast double leg takedowns. And so far in his career, he's been pretty impressive. Easily disposed of Todorovic, easily knocked out Klein. But he did get spinning elbow dropped by Klein, which was crazy. Less than impressive performance by against Cody Brundage, where there was some fouls and shit in that fight. But, beat Trockley. He has truly had like 4 absolute cans on his way to this fight here versus Yusri Belgaroui. And I think that might come back to haunt him, because if this fight extends 2nd, 3rd round and he's not having success with the grappling, he's going to get pieced up on the feet. And Belgaroui, however you want to pronounce it, Yusri Belgaroui, he looked fantastic last time out versus Azamat Bikoev, and he won there as a big-time underdog. His get-up game was fantastic. He'd get the whizzer, get the underhook. He'd be right back up to his feet. His sprawling looked nice. His grappling overall defensively looked sound. And in the clinch, he was landing big knees, good elbows, and at range, the jab, the leg kicks are a huge issue to anybody that isn't at that level of striking. And I don't think that Mansur is. Mansur is definitely a natural athlete. He has talent and skill and athleticism like crazy, but in terms of head movement, understanding distance, feint game, setups, in terms of striking, Yusri is going to be levels ahead. And I'm actually going to take Yusri to win by 3rd round TKO. I think that Mansur Abdul Malik, he's going to have success in the 1st round, getting the fight to the mat. Belgaroui is going to continuously get up, land a couple pop shots, land a couple jabs, knees in the clinch to deter the takedown. By the end of the 1st round, Mansur is going to be tired. He's going to be swinging big telegraphed shots to try to get the knockout. Belgaroui is going to be pull countering him with the height advantage. He's going to be popping him with the jab. Knees up the middle are going to be big, and eventually I think that in the 3rd round he's going to break Abdul Malik down and finish him up with knees and uppercuts. Just a classic tall man's finish against the fence in the 3rd round. So yeah, give me Yusri Belgaroui by 3rd round TKO. Next fight on the card, Julian Erosa, a fellow Julian. Julian Erosa versus Larian Douglas. Now, this is actually kind of a close fight, possibly. Now, Larian Douglas, very talented striker. He beat that Javier Reyes dude on the regional scene. I believe he got the LFA title in the featherweight division. Quick counter striker, fast hands, and just a classic Brazilian, aggressive striker. That's just kind of his style. Digs calf kicks, rips the body well, works in combination, decent forward pressure, good counter game, pretty quick. Julian Erosa, though, is just a dog, man. Really good straight shots with his height and reach advantage. Gave Mel Costa like a war and a half last time out, where he lost a split decision. I think he did deserve to lose that fight, but it was very, very close. And we've seen how good Mel Costa has looked recently. And Julian Erosa, very, very crafty with the submission game. He subbed up C-Rod, which is not easy to do. Austin Bashi wasn't able to do it. Bulgarian wasn't able to do it. Julian Erosa got the sub over C-Rod. Larry Douglas has also been subbed, I believe, 2 or 3 times out of his losses in his career. I don't have it on the UFC website, but if you look on Tapology, Douglas, he's been subbed multiple times. And Julian Erosa is nasty with the submission game. Subbed Ramos. He's got a solid UFC resume. You can't sleep on it. He did not look good in this Elkins fight, though. That shit completely slipped my mind. Like, he looked so much better against Costa in this loss than he did against Elkins in this win. But I feel like that was just he was just kind of chilling in there. He literally finished him with a jab. I think he knew that was going to be an easy win. Great win versus C-Rod. Great sub versus Ramos. Lost to Padilla by TKO. Not the best look. Lost to Caceres by TKO. That's not the best look. You know, when you see that, you're like, okay, Douglas is probably going to KO him. But I'm telling you, he looked tough as fucking nails last time out versus Costa. And I liked the performance. I'm going to pick my fellow Julian here as a big underdog to beat Larian Douglas. I think Larian Douglas might have, you know, Chiesa syndrome, a little bit hesitant like he was against Nathaniel Wood. You know, Lacerne Chiesa, that is. And I think Douglas might be a little hesitant. He might not let his hands go. Erosa might get him up against the fence, start putting that pressure on him. Next thing you know, he's, you know, going to be 2 rounds down, and he's going to be getting reckless. And Erosa might start catching him with lanky man's knees up the middle. He might start, you know, looking to hop on the back, look to wrap up a sub. Give me Julian Erosa. I'll pick him by decision. Next fight on the card, Carlson Harris versus Michael Chiesa. Carlson Harris has taken this on like a week's notice or something. I honestly forget who this was supposed to be. He lost last time out to Santiago Ponzinibbio, I believe it was. Yeah, got knocked out by Ponzinibbio. You know, Carlson Harris, solid boxer. That's kind of all he has, though, realistically. You know, good right hand. Not the most durable fighter either. You know, he was getting knocked down by Ponzinibbio. Got knocked out by Chaos Williams. He was able to get the submission against Jeremiah Wells, which is actually a solid sub considering Wells is a BJJ black belt. But I'm going to pick Chiesa here by decision. You know, an old man, stinky man's boring performance. Sub Tony, laid on Griffin in a boring fight, laid on Court McGee in a boring fight. No, he actually struck with Court McGee. I fell asleep during that fight. He laid on Max Griffin. Dude, if you're ever having trouble sleeping at night, turn on Michael Chiesa versus Court McGee. You want to talk about boring, holy fuck. But I think he's just going to be able to grapple his way to a decision here. Even though he's not very durable or good on the feet at this point, Chiesa has and is he has always been, and he still is, a solid grappler who can tend to win fights like that as long as he's not going against someone really good. So, give me Chiesa here. Decision. All right. We move on to the main event of the evening. The reason why we're all here, because let's be honest, this card is kind of dog water aside from the main event. But the main event is absolutely fantastic. If you've watched my channel in the past, you know I'm a huge Israel Adesanya fan, one of my favorite fighters of all time, and truly, like, just a legend of the sport. He got a lot of hate for a long time, and, you know, the dog shit was kind of funny with Sean Strickland, and of course, you know, Frozen Like Elsa, and everything that came with the drama of the Alex Pereira fights. Israel Adesanya is a bona fide legend, Hall of Famer of the sport. Former 2-time middleweight champion, one of the best strikers to ever be in the UFC. And like I said, one of my favorite fighters of all time, huge personal inspiration of mine, and it's hurt so bad to see him lose in the fashion that he has in his last 3. You know, I picked him and bet on him in all 3 of those fights. You know, the Strickland fight, bad stylistic matchup in retrospect. You know, he was coming off of a knockout win versus Alex Pereira. There was like, everybody was like, there's no way he's going to lose to Sean Strickland, who has no power, very one-dimensional. But Sean Strickland, he's proven that his style can give certain people a lot of fucking issues. And Israel Adesanya, being a back foot counter striker who's heavy with the kicking and the leg kicking game, Sean Strickland's style gave Izzy big time issues. Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. I made a whole video talking about how Izzy was going to completely style on and embarrass Dricus du Plessis. And that was a very, very good fight. One of the best fights of 2024. One of my favorite middleweight title fights of all time. Very high level, back and forth. You know, I think Dricus won the first round. Or no, Izzy won the first round. Dricus won the second round. Izzy won the third and the fourth and then got finished. Very back and forth fight. Looked good in that fight in terms of minute-to-minute performance. Looked way better in the Dricus du Plessis fight than he did in the Sean Strickland fight. Was digging the body very well. You know, his exits were a little bit unclean, but his takedown defense and overall grappling looked solid in the Dricus du Plessis fight, aside from the submission where, you know, in that 4th round, as he's trying to exit off to his left, I think he, you know, his footwork failed him. He got a little tired. he let his feet get crossed up underneath him and got taken down while he was running away with his back turned. And he was already in a compromised position at that point. But in the Imavov fight, I picked him there. I thought he was going to be able to beat Imavov. I think he had the tools to beat Imavov, considering, Imavov doesn't have great cardio. And we know that Izzy, once he gets past the first and second round, typically he can cruise to a decision, unless you're Alex Pereira. But, Imavov, the hand speed is truly just something to behold. Izzy, Robert Whittaker, they were always, in my opinion, like the fastest, most dynamic strikers in middleweight. Of course, aside from Silva back in the day, but we're talking about modern era. Nasruddin Imavov has the best and fastest boxing in middleweight history. And you can't say anything to, take away from that fact. It's just the eye test. When you look at the skill in terms of how he cuts angles, the way he sets up shots, and the speed and the precision, the way he knocked out Cannonier, the way he knocked out Adesanya, Imavov is the best boxer and has the best hand speed in middleweight history. So that's always going to be a difficult matchup for Izzy. And Izzy was low-key dominating that fight until he got clipped. And maybe on a different day, Izzy's chin is a little bit better and he takes that shot, but I think it's just the speed, Got dropped by that right hand from Strickland, but Strickland, he's hurt people before. It was a very similar finish. Imavov's finish against Izzy, in the same way that Izzy got dropped by Sean Strickland, that straight right, when Izzy kind of keeps his feet planted and goes for that check hook. It can happen in 4-ounce gloves. It can happen to the best of us. But aside from that, stylistically, we know the deal with Izzy. Very, very good fence, takedown defense, very good sprawls. Takedown defense in general is quite good. His judo trips along the fence are actually very underrated. Sometimes he'll trip people up, get in top position, land a couple ground and pound shots. And obviously, switch stance combination work, head kick setups is all super, super high level from Israel Adesanya. Nasty jab, world-class leg kicks. He's just a world-class kickboxer, former glory kickboxer. We all remember the nasty knockout versus Alex Pereira, one of the best moments in UFC history, one of the most inspirational, best post-fight speeches in UFC history. Israel Adesanya is a character out of a movie. And Joe Pyfer is just a straight-up villain, man. He's just a villain full of hate. Like, this dude is just rage personified. Poor GM3, man. Poor GM3. But, poor GM3, dude. Come on now. Why we gotta do GM3 like that? We gotta give him Hamzat and Pyfer and motherfucking Dawkins. Like, let's just not let GM3 get hurt anymore. No one wants to see GM3 get hurt. I'm going on a tangent. That's besides the point. When you look at Joe Pyfer's resume, when you watch his fights back, one thing stands out, and that this dude is just a brute power puncher. And that's the name of the game, a brute power puncher. He has okay grappling, submission win versus Abdulrazak Al Hassan, submission win versus Abus Magomedov. But aside from that, man, it's just the big clubbing shots, the big mean right hand with all of the hatred from all of his trauma and hatred for the world, just directly coiled into that right hand. And Marc-Andre Barriou took 2 of them, and that was all she wrote. Almost head kick KO'd Gastelum and knocked him down with the right hand, I believe. But you want to talk about a shitty performance, man? Joe Pyfer versus Gastelum was a shitty performance. That was a very slow fight. He didn't really do much of anything. Couple body kicks, couple jabs, couple twos, but Joe Pyfer's striking arsenal is very, very weak. And that was shown in this Jack Hermansson fight, where Pyfer took the first 2 rounds, landed some big clobber and left hooks, pushed him up against the fence a little bit, had some leg kicks, but 3, 4, 5, Hermansson started crafting on him. Popping him with the jab, breaking the nose, busting the teeth up, leg kicking him, taking him down. And like I said, third, 4th, and 5th, Hermansson was jabbing and leg kicking Pyfer, and Pyfer looked like he'd never fucking taken a kickboxing class in his life. And holy shit, if he starts to look like that versus Izzy, Izzy's going to leg kick TKO him. But, his only loss in the UFC coming to Jack Hermansson, and there's definitely some similarities. Like I said, the jab, the leg kick, and just the minute-to-minute striking is where Joe Pyfer struggles. When he's in the pocket and just, gritting down on the mouthpiece and holding his breath and fucking gritting down with everything he's got, that's where Pyfer is best. But when it's a thinking man's game at range, when you're needing to use footwork and head movement and setups and feints and varying your attacks, he's not good there. He just truly isn't. There were times where Gastelum was outboxing him. And, his grappling's overrated too, man. His grappling's very overrated. I remember myself and a lot of people predicting his previous fights ever since the Hermanson fight. Well, and even if it gets a little sticky on the feet, we know Joe Pyfer can always shoot takedowns. He has a submission win versus Adesanya. He trains with Sean Brady. You got to imagine that he's a solid submission artist. But Magomedov low-key just kind of quit in that fight. I wasn't super impressed with the performance there by Pyfer. I had money on Pyfer in that fight, and I wasn't really impressed. He was able to turn the tide in the second round, but I'm picking Izzy by decision. I have money on Izzy. I have one unit at plus 110 on Israel Adesanya. Got him at plus money. He's never been a dog in his entire UFC career. So I see Izzy at plus money. I'm betting it. I'm sorry. I don't care if I've lost on him 3 times in a row. I'm betting him plus money against somebody that he holds an advantage against in every single aspect of MMA except for offensive takedowns and submission ability. He's not more durable. Joe Pyfer is going to have the durability. He's obviously got a submission threat in his back pocket. But I got to pick Izzy by decision. I think Izzy's going to be able to school him essentially on the feet at range for the entire fight. And Joe Pyfer, he's going to have to display much better cage control. He's going to have to be very, very aggressive. Now, I will say, Joe Pyfer needing to use cage control and being aggressive, obviously he's got to string the boxing combinations together against Izzy. He can't stay at kicking range because he's going to get minced up. But aside from the durability concerns on the side of Adesanya, where he doesn't seem to be able to take a shot like he used to, the counter-striking ability is what concerns me. Because on the front foot against Dricus, Amavov, and even Sean Strickland at times, that Sean Strickland fight was much more competitive than people like to make it seem. They like to act like Strickland just completely put belt to ass, but there was like 5-6 strikes in between them every single round. Moving forward, on the front foot recently, and it hasn't always been this way in his career, which is odd, but Adesanya's had much more success with the hands, moving forward. And normally, you look back at his fight versus Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa when he was truly in his prime, it was the back foot counter striking, the back foot hooks, the pull counters that were his most dangerous tools. And he seemed to have gotten away from that a little bit. There were so many times in the Dricus fight where Dricus was falling over himself, swinging, swimming through midair. And I was like, Izzy, just lean back on a counter hook like you did against Whittaker and Costa. But he would not sit down on his shots. He wouldn't plant his feet and sit down on his counters. He would, try and just completely exit out of range and reset, which is something he's done throughout his career as well, but predominantly in the Costa and the Whittaker fights and the Gastelum fight. He would sit down and just swing a nasty counter and clip you bad many, many times. Like how he dropped Whittaker in the first fight with that right hook, dropped him with the left hook to finish him. His counter striking with his hands has always been one of his best attributes, but like I said, he's gotten away from it a little bit. And Dricus was putting his chin literally like that, just chin up in the air on a silver platter multiple times, and Izzy never countershotted him. So I don't think Izzy's going to get a countershot TKO here, and Izzy's only ever gotten finishes in the first 3 rounds. So I think I'm going to pick Izzy by decision here. I think that the first 4 rounds, Izzy will be able to just outstrike him, do his thing, question mark kick him, 1-2s, leg kicks, teeps up the middle. He's going to do his thing, put points on the board. Round 5, my prediction will be that Joe Pyfer gets a takedown in round 5, maybe ends up mounting Izzy, landing some good ground and pound. Izzy's supporters are getting scared, but I think that Izzy survives the late onslaught in the 5th rounds. He wins in the 5th round. He'll win a 49-46 decision, 4 rounds to 1 for Israel Adesanya. He'll be back in the win column. So I hope Izzy wins, man. I really hope Izzy wins. I like him a lot as a fighter. One of my biggest inspirations in this sport. So I really hate to see him lose 4 times in a row. It's been hard to watch him. especially get knocked out by Imavov. But Imavov, he's a very, very good fighter who I respect a lot, so no hate on Imavov. But give me Israel Adesanya to win this fight. I think that he stays safe. I think that Joe Pyfer will underperform. And yeah, give me Izzy by decision. I think Joe Pyfer is going to underperform. I think that he doesn't put enough numbers up. The KO threat is overrated. The grappling is overrated. I think Joe Pyfer's overrated. Give me Israel Adesanya to win a decision here. Then let's make Izzy versus RDR, Joe Pyfer versus RoboCop. That'll be all I have to say about this main event. If you guys enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe. That means a lot to me, and enjoy the card this weekend.